an image of the Virgin said to weep real tears, brings over 50,000 pilgrims to the shrine. Old people, invalids, the crippled and blind from all parts of Italy cluster before the image.
So for this story we will move to Italy, to a place called Syracuse, right over here. It's a city with Greek temples, nearly 2,800 years old, the city of Archimedes. But that's not why we're here. We are here because of something that happened in this city, something that ended up drawing more than 50,000 pilgrims a year, to a place where barely 80,000 people lived. And it starts with this. A cheap plaster plaque of the Virgin Mary, stamped out by the thousands in a workshop. You could buy one for a few dollars. Half the families on the street probably had the same one on their wall. And it was a pretty standard wedding gift to give, which is exactly what happened. In March of 1953, it was given to a young couple who just got married, Angelo and Antonina Iannuso, and they hung it over their bed. Angelo was 27 and Antonina was 20 years old. They weren't religious at all. In fact, Antonina barely set foot in a church at all, and Angelo was a committed communist. They were living in the poorest neighborhood called the Borgata. That summer, Antonina was pregnant with their first child. But the pregnancy was difficult. She had very high blood pressure called toxemia, which caused seizures and periods where she would completely lose her eyesight for hours at a time. On the morning of August 29th, she had one of the worst seizures. It was around 3 a.m. when the seizures left her completely blind. By 8:30 that morning, her sight came back and the first thing she saw was the small statue on the wall. But this time the face was wet. Tears were running from the eyes of the statue down the cheeks and onto her bed. She called for her sister-in-law and her aunt, because her husband had already left for work. When they arrived, they were stunned. The statue was completely wet, just as Antonina had told them. They carried the plaque out in the street and called the neighbors, and the neighbors saw it too. By that afternoon, it wasn't a handful of neighbors anymore. The news traveled on foot from doorway to doorway. People came to see for themselves, and the statue kept weeping. When Angelo got home from work that evening, he couldn't reach his own front door. There was a crowd in the street in front of his house. And his first thought wasn't a miracle. It was that something had happened to his pregnant wife. He pushed through to get inside. What he found was the plaque, still crying, and strangers filling his home. It went on like that for 4 days, from the 29th of August to the 1st of September. The Madonna wept over and over, at least 58 times by most accounts. They took the statue off the bedroom wall and hung it on the front door of the house. Then moved it across the street behind a gate so the crowd wouldn't crush it. The police had to come in just to manage the street. People pressed handkerchiefs and cotton onto the statue to soak up the tears and carry them home. So many hands reached for the Madonna's face that the paint slowly started to fade. On the second day, a local man named Nicola Guarino turned up with a small camera and filmed it.
Era un regalo di nozze quel quadretto con l'immagine in gesso della Madonna che i giovani Coso avevano situato sopra il letto.
This was very likely the first time anything like this was ever caught on film. And that camera mattered far more than anyone on that street could have known, because up to now this was just a rumor. But you can't unsee something thousands of people have already watched with their own eyes. This wasn't going to fade anytime soon, now that it was filmed and caught on camera. Which also meant somebody was going to have to step up and say out loud whether this was real.